Did I see a Coke?
A Coke product.
Oh, wow. Never heard of it, but here's to you.
How
Wow.
you do? Yeah, it's sparkling water, but it's done by Coca-Cola.
Must be okay.
So are you sitting at the Hall of Fame? Is that where you are?
I'm in my basement.
That's it. That's your hideout.
Yeah. Although what you can't see is such a mess. I'm seldom here.
I know the feeling.
Yeah.
Believe me.
Where are you, Frank?
I'm in Virginia Beach.
Oh, okay.
And where are you? And who are you? Wait a minute. Who are you?
Oh, my name's Ted Noor. I'm a Negro League fan. And I'm in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania,
Okay.
where the great Oscar Charleston played 4 years in the 20s.
Oh, so this should be a fun night for you.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, it's a pretty good book.
I think so.
Are you with the chapter up there in that area?
The new chapter, yeah. I think it's called the Christy Mathewson Eddie Plank chapter.
Really?
It's
I
only
guess
6 months old or less. Yeah.
Well, we're in our first year still as well.
Oh.
So.
And do you have a name?
The Bud Metheny Chapter.
You stumped me.
Bud Metheny was the longtime baseball coach for Old Dominion University.
Okay.
And Bud had played for the Yankees during the war from 43 to 45. Never played a game outside of the war years. So his claim to fame, God rest his soul, he's passed away. His claim to fame was that he was the last man to wear number 3 as a Yankee. And he did wear number 3 for the
he must have.
For the 3 seasons he was a Yankee. He wore number 3.
Wow.
But he wasn't the last. But he was the last big name to wear it. So Bud is we were trying to find a name for the chapter. We wanted someone who had some local history. And Bud was a logical thing. He was a fixture at Old Dominion for almost 40 years. So his claim to fame, the first research project was to debunk Bud's story that he was the last guy to wear number 3.
And then is Cliff Mapes the last guy, or who is the last guy?
Wow, that's great. Cliff Mapes is probably the last big name. There were around 7 people who wore number 3 after. Yeah, but Mapes was the biggest name of the bunch after Metheny.
But you're saying he wasn't the last?
I don't think he was the last. I can, something? I probably can tell you only because we did a presentation for our first meeting. I did a presentation for the first meeting.
Oh, okay.
About that. I don't know if Cliff was last. I swear I think it was someone else. Let me see. But I like that. I'm impressed that you came back with that.
Well, I do have the Babes jersey up in the back there. So
now, was that really the Babes?
Well, it's a 1923 facsimile.
I got it. That's
not. And right behind me, that's Charleston, 1925 Oscar Charleston.
Is that an Ebbets Field jersey?
That is an Ebbets Field flannel, and the Harrisburg Senators wore it. Now that's not a game worn, but the Senators wore Ebbets Field flannels with that jersey and also with this jersey. This is a 1924.
Nice.
So they've worn 2 Negro League jerseys in the past 20 years.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Okay, so you know something? It was Cliff Mapes. He April to June, right, in 48, April to June, he had 15 games, batted .304, then gave his number up and went to 13.
Oh,
and
but
tanked.
Wait a minute. Now, did he give 13 up?
No, he wore 13. He wore 13 after he gave up 3.
Oh,
because they retired Babe Ruth's uniform. That was, Babe Ruth Day.
Yeah.
Was there.
Somehow I had a bizarre thought, or before 3, did did he wear 7? I thought he wore Mantle and Ruth.
I don't know. I mean, I have a feeling maybe he wore. I guess he got rid of 13 eventually because he went from 304 to 250. So I would do like Roger Craig did, right? When Roger Craig had that horrible losing streak, he put on 13, thinking that would break the curse.
Uh-huh.
So it's possible, but yeah. So there were 5 guys who wore and Cliff Mapes was the last one of the 5.
Okay.
So you win my respect with that one. That was great.
Thank you.
That,
Yes, Mapes did wear. Oh, wow. Listen to this. Mapes wore 3, 7, and 5.
wow. 5.
Yeah. However, 7 was the only predictive one. I mean, he knew who 3 and 5 were. He wore 5, and he wore 5 as a Detroit Tiger. So that doesn't count.
That
But he
doesn't
did
count.
he wore 3 and 7.
Wow. Well, and he wore 13.
And he wore 13 and he wore, 46 was with another team also. But 3, 7, and 13 are as a Yankee.
Wow. Well, well, I mean, I felt bad. I felt awful because Bud wore 3 his entire career at Old Dominion, and they retired the number. They put it on the wall at the stadium and so I had met him, but I didn't know him. I knew his successors. I've been affiliated with the college team for a while, and so I knew a lot of the Bud myth and legend and the braggadocio of that number. And
Is that a good program?
It's an okay program. I mean, it's not the greatest. Made it to the dance a number of times over the years. They've maybe had a decade of weak performance. But they're graduates, Ryan Yarborough and Justin Verlander.
Oh, wow.
So I got up against Verlander.
Oh, wow.
When he was a student there. He pitched batting practice to me. And I didn't hit anything then.
Wow.
I was getting ready for baseball camp. So I got a chance to work out with the team, and they let me, go out there and take some batting practice. And Verlander was the guy throwing batting practice. He was a freshman.
Interesting.
Yeah. Nice kid. He was a nice kid. But he still didn't let me hit anything.
Wasn't that nice?
Not that nice. That's right. But Ryan Yarborough pitched there. Wayne Gomes.
Okay. I'm not familiar with Yarborough.
Yarborough's he's a pitcher on Tampa Bay right now, and statistically he looks good. He's just been a beneficiary of a lot of run support, but he ripped off a stretch of like 8 wins in a row a couple of years ago. But he's an average pitcher. But
meanwhile, I have bad news. I don't think I can attend this meeting. I'm going to set myself off the video. So if I get back, you'll see me. That way and now I'm going to go to another room. I have another meeting.
So do I. It was good. So do I. I have office hours this evening for my students.
Oh, wow.
So I'm going to be off video for a while too.
Yeah.
If I don't see you again, please join us in the future. Okay.
Well, you have Jeremy. I'm here to see Jeremy, but sure, I'll keep an eye on. I'll keep an eye on number 3's, chapter.
Come on, come on down to enjoy it. We have a lot of fun.
All righty.
Okay, take care of yourself.
See you, Frank.
Okay, bye-bye.
What am I doing? Hi, Don. Okay.
Nope, it's still Frank.
So Jason, Don, and me so far. Everyone's here. Apologies to everybody. Yep. Makes sense. Yes. Does. It does.
All right. I would like to introduce Jeremy Beer. He is a principal partner at American Philanthropic, a consulting firm whose mission is to strengthen civil society by improving effectiveness of charitable foundations and nonprofit organizations. Jeremy has published over more than 40 essays and articles on philanthropy, culture, and politics in various academic and popular journals. In March, Jeremy's most recent book, Oscar Charleston, The Life and Legend of Baseball's Greatest Forgotten Player, was the winner of the 2020 SABR Seymour Medal, which honors the best book of baseball history or biography. So congratulations on that honor, Jeremy. And thank you for joining our book club this evening. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So Jeremy, how did you what inspired you to write a book on Oscar Charleston?
Yeah, Bill James, indirectly anyway. This must have been 12, 13, 14 years ago. I don't know how long ago now. And was finally making my way through his new historical baseball abstract, with which I'm sure many of you are familiar. It's a big compendium of lists and things like that, the greatest this, the greatest that. He has his top 100 players of all time in that book. And number one is Babe Ruth, of course. This is 2000, so it's before Barry Bonds had started to edge his way into the conversation. 2, I think, is Mays or Wagner. Honus Wagner and Willie Mays are 2 and 3. And number 4 was Oscar Charleston. And I had never heard of Oscar Charleston. And I couldn't believe that it's possible that I had never heard of the 4th greatest baseball player of all time. And so that really piqued my interest. It kind of ticked me off. And then I found out he was from Indiana, which is where I'm from. And I thought I knew all the greatest athletes from Indiana. There was a sort of thing my friends and I would do, you know, hey, who are the greatest basketball? Let's make it our all-time Indiana basketball team, that kind of thing. So that really, really piqued my interest. So I started, Googling around for what I could find on Charleston. And it was pretty clear that he was a man that lived maybe more in the realm of mythology than history. They hadn't really been taken seriously as a historical figure. A lot of telephone game had clearly been played about his life. Things are muddled and garbled. You see this thing here, that thing there, they clearly can't be quite right. And so eventually I decided, why not just go ahead and write his biography myself? So there's the not very interesting story about how this came about, but it was really out of Indiana patriotism, actually, is really what it came out of, to sort of rescue a fellow Hoosier from unjustified, obscure status.
So that's the difference between a Seymour Award winner and us, right? I probably read that same Bill James book and went, yeah, I don't know much about him, and kept reading, right? That's where I was. So talk about the researching the book. Like, how did you find your sources, given that, like you said, a lot about Oscar was folklore or word of mouth or telephone tag. How did you find your sources, and then what advice would you give to people like us that want to do research on topics and need to go to unconventional places to find info?
Yeah, that's a great question. I decided pretty early on that I couldn't trust any secondary source. I wasn't going to trust any just internet article or a he said, she said sort of thing that was itself drawing on some primary source. So I just sort of dug through footnotes and things to get to primary sources. I wanted to, which led me to, for instance, newspaper articles were going to be my major thing. And so the reason why you can do a biography like this today, and you couldn't have done 15 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, is that every newspaper has been digitized now, right? Or almost every newspaper, 80 to 90% of them. And so you don't have to go through a bunch of microfiche archives and libraries around the country. You can just do a search right at your computer. If you have a newspapers.com or and a proquest.com, those are the 2 subscriptions that you kind of really need. And with that, you're able to search thousands of newspapers. So I really went back to newspapers as much as I could. And then interviews, the interviews that John Holloway and Brent Kelly and Don Banks and others with baseball players, and just so you were getting their own words, or at least as filtered into those men's books. So in some cases I was able to have access to the tapes. So those were the primary sources. Then I discovered sometime early on, thank God, that Larry Luster, the sort of the dean of Negro Leagues historians, had acquired Charleston's personal scrapbook and personal photo album for the Negro Leagues Museum in Kansas City, which I had no idea they were there. They're not sort of indexed online or anything. So that was fantastic. Yes, those things and get a window into Oscar's own brain, his own mind, like what was important to him, what did he keep in his scrapbook. For instance, you learn in that scrapbook that he was able to translate Spanish into English well enough that he would just do it on the margins of newspaper clippings from Cuban newspapers. He would translate from the Spanish into English in his own handwriting, which I thought was remarkable. A man has an 8th grade education, and I assume his only real exposure to Spanish came in Cuba. And so he just picked up Spanish well enough to write it, read it, and speak it, just playing summer ball in Cuba. That's unbelievable. So it really gave you a window into his intelligence. And other things like that. I can go on and on. But so I just try to get to right primary sources is the answer. One other thing that was really key, there was a guy named John Julian. Did you guys know that name at all? SCH?
No, I don't.
He's a sports writer. He's written for Sports Illustrated and some other things. He has a book out with the University of Nebraska Press. He's the co-creator of Xena Warrior Princess. Do you remember that TV show? Yeah. So that's just a cool fact about John Julian. That has nothing to do with what I'm telling you. But he did an article on Oscar Charleston for Sports Illustrated about 2000 or so.
Yeah.
Early 2000s. Kept all his, I contacted him and said, hey, this article's great. I don't know if you have any leads for me or whatever. He's like, better than that, I got a couple of boxes full of notes I'll send to you. And so there were all his transcriptions of interviews with guys that were dead now. Buck O'Neill, Double Duty Radcliffe, and others, some Charleston family members. So I was able to essentially like interview them 15 years after the fact. And so that was really helpful too. So I don't know.
Do you know how Larry came across the scrapbook?
Yeah, he was watching a documentary. Somehow somebody sent this to him, or I don't know how he was watching it. But he was writing a documentary on Charleston that some guy in Indianapolis made, I want to say in the late 80s, early 90s. And it may have just been about the Negro Leagues. It may not have just been about Charleston. But Anna Charleston Bradley came onto the screen and started talking about Charleston, how he was her uncle. And so he's like, I got to get a hold of this woman. She may have things, because that's how Larry thinks. And she did. She had his scrapbook and photo album. He flew to Indianapolis and purchased it on behalf of the museum.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, very cool. So my advice just is like, don't trust secondary sources, I guess, and do your work from primary sources as much as you can. It's only way.
Yeah, I've been asked by a couple SABR members to look up some Negro League baseball game that was played in Norfolk, and I found it hard to find that. I went down to the library and actually went through the microfiche because they were like weekly.
Yeah.
And so you'd see the week prior, it would say Monarchs playing, Crawfords at Norfolk Stadium. And then you'd go to the following week and there'd be nothing about the game, no box score, no nothing. And so it was very hit and miss whether you could actually see things and follow up on what was actually happening.
That's one of the frustrating aspects of research in this. Yeah, not every game. A lot of games are advertised in the papers and they're never reported on. So you don't know where they played or not. And that's why you have to go to multiple papers. So sometimes, the Chicago Defender will have a game account, but the Norfolk paper wouldn't. Or the Pittsburgh Courier would have an account, but the Chicago paper wouldn't. Or the Atlanta, I think it was the Daily Eagle or something in Atlanta, or the Amsterdam Daily News. There are a number of black papers, and you sort of I found I was often piecing it together from a number of them. And then often, I don't know what the case was in Norfolk. It might have been different. But in the North, like the Indianapolis Star actually covered like ABC's games fairly well. So you can't just, even the mainstream, the white press sometimes covered the Negro Leagues.
Right. Yeah. I didn't see, I'd go through the white press and there would be nothing. I mean, like it never happened, right?
I suspect the South might have been.
Yeah.
Although I think there are just so many regional differences, maybe just editorial differences based on people. Sometimes there's not a lot of reason to it.
Right.
Yeah. When I was trying to track down the exact game that that I saw as a 7-year-old. I went through, I got on newspaper.com and went through the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle and Times Union, and I found about 6 or 7 barnstorming games of Negro League teams in the 50s that were played in Rochester. And so I just kind of, by a process of elimination, knowing that I saw the Clowns versus the Monarchs, there was only one of those 6 or 7 games that was the Clowns versus the Monarchs. And I saw one other game in which they had the Clowns had a switch pitcher named Ulysses Grant Green. And that was that was in like 1958 or 59.
Cool.
So
He threw both-handed?
yeah, through through righty to right-handed hitters and lefty to left-handed hitters, like Pat Venditti, of more recent vintage in the major leagues.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, he had 6 fingers on his glove, and he switched the glove in between batters. And
So Jeremy, as I was reading through the book, the one thing that struck me was just how it appeared that the Negro League that Oscar Charleston was a part of were so disorganized, and they moved, like rosters turned over incredibly from year to year. So what were contracts like back then? Like, were there contracts, and did it seems like everything was year to year, and but what about the contracts? And then from a salary perspective, what was the Negro League pay like versus the Major League pay?
Yeah. So first of all, there were contracts. Now, there weren't always contracts, but there were contracts. It's a myth to say that there weren't contracts. I have a copy of one that Charleston signed in 1938 for schoolboy Johnny Taylor on the Crawfords. And we know Effa Manley, among others, hotly denied when Branch Rickey came out and said there weren't any contracts in 1945, whenever that was. Like, no, we had contracts. And we have copies of contracts. So we know there were contracts. But not every team, and probably not all the time. You couldn't enforce a contract anyway, so why have a contract? The problem with the leagues weren't strong enough to enforce the contracts, and so that's why they didn't always have a lot of importance. Why weren't the leagues strong enough? Because the Negro Leagues were undercapitalized. Why were the Negro Leagues undercapitalized? Because there just wasn't enough money in the Black community. We're not that far away in the 20s and 30s from slavery, right? We're 60 years away. So there's just not enough money. And if there's not enough money, you don't have strong leagues. So all these things are connected, but they really go back to the fact that they're just undercapitalized, which is again why, they rely on a lot of white co-owners oftentimes. Obviously in the Monarchs case, just white owners straight up. Or white investors anyway. So, and that was always like a sore point with people for a lot of reasons. But so you see a lot of moving around and fluid player movement and jumping contracts and things like that. The disincentives to doing that were low. And you would see that today in baseball if the disincentives weren't super high, right? If the White Sox just signed Mike Trout tomorrow and he decided to, say, my contract's no good with the Angels, which of course he never would. It's a fantastic contract. There's no way Major League Baseball let that happen, right? But in the context of Negro Leagues baseball, the Monarchs might say, well, screw you. We don't need your league. We'll just go barnstorm. We're fine. It's essentially what Satchel Paige and the guys who jumped to the Dominican to play for Trujillo in 1930. The league said, hey, come back and join, the team in the NNL. And they're like, all right, let's go barnstorm as the Trujillo All-Stars and make a ton of money, which they did. And so the owners caved very quickly. So those are that kind of context that we're not used to, because we enjoy many of the benefits that really do come from established leagues and which make contracts enforceable and all the rest. And they didn't enjoy that. As far as what they were paid, sorry, to get to your other question, a lot less, of course, than their white Major League counterparts. I think I read somewhere like 5 to 10 times less on average, so significantly less. On the other hand, it's worth pointing out it was good money compared to your average black worker. And it was more than the average white worker by a factor of probably about 2x as well. So it wasn't bad money, about $300 a month. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah.
I want to say on average in the kind of the golden age, you get up to 400 or so, maybe 450. So more than the average white worker, significantly more than the average black worker, a lot less than their white counterparts in Major League Baseball.
So what I saw, reading that there were many games played in Major League Baseball stadiums, right? And especially in New York, they had to go through Booker's and all that. And I'm reading F.A. Manley, that book right now. So, I know they were trying to get around paying those booking agent fees, whatever. But I know that a lot of these teams had home stadiums, but they used them so infrequently, or it just seemed like it was very random. What drove that?
Well, some teams, I guess you're right. Most teams probably had their own home stadiums. What drove it? Well, you could make more in a major league stadium. You could fit more people in the park usually, right? So getting 25,000 people to show up for a doubleheader on a Sunday in New York was a really good deal. And Forbes Field's kind of a similar thing at Pittsburgh, or Scheid Park in Philadelphia. So some of it was just a capacity issue. The other thing was just, Drew, that is like getting out on the road and seeing new fans that often didn't get to see baseball. So again, you got to think an environment in which not only is there no MLB.TV, not only is there no TV, there's no radio. So no one ever sees a baseball game, between top players in wherever, Joplin, Missouri, unless somebody comes in. And so that would be a reason for the brainstorming that would often complement playing in major league stadiums. So just staying at home, I think oftentimes probably had diminishing returns compared to what you could get with a quick barnstorming tour through the hinterlands or a weekend set at a major league stadium.
So I would think that then the relationship of the players played a great deal in how teams were formed, friendships amongst the players, whether they liked somebody or didn't like somebody. Did Charleston's personality keep them from forming, getting other players because they didn't want such a strong personality? Or
no, it seems to be the opposite. For the most part, he seems to have been a selling point. There were players who didn't like him. Judy Johnson didn't like him, but then Judy Johnson also played with him on the Crawfords for a few years. And one or two of the other Crawfords weren't huge fans. But, he attracted Josh Gibson and Satchel to come over from the Grays when Gus Greenlee formed the Pittsburgh Crawfords as a team. He was pretty effective in attracting talent to Harrisburg in 1924 through 1927, which wouldn't have been regarded as a premier place to play. I think he was liked. He was charismatic and charming and generally liked by people. He was tough as a manager, but it was a time in which players expected managers to be tough. There was no such thing as a player's manager in 1932. I mean, you're expected to be tough. So seems to have been liked. I didn't come across any indications that he wasn't able to attract talent to the teams he was heading up because of his personality. And even Paige came back to the Crawfords over and over again, while Charleston was managing, and no two men ever had more diametrically opposed personalities than Oscar Charleston and Satchel Paige.
So was he as big a fighter as the book alluded to? I mean, was he Ty Cobb-ish, or how many altercations would he get into on a regular basis?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have the counts, but I came away from that. So I read, Ty Cobb, the new biography of Cobb by Charles Learson, which is really good. He really tries to resurrect Cobb from sort of the depths to which his reputation had sunk. And I think he does it to a good degree. But even with that in mind, I don't think Charleston probably got in quite as many fights as Cobb. He certainly didn't get into as many altercations as Cobb did. Charleston basically got into no altercations off the field. And then, at least that we know of. And except for a couple that are apocryphal, probably. And what was the last question? Oh, he was more liked than Cobb. That's the major difference. The one thing that even Learson can't do is make it seem like Cobb was liked by his teammates, right? Most of them just didn't like the guy. And he was aloof and arrogant and, prideful and just likable, prickly personality. That wasn't Charleston.
Was the Negro Leagues, were they rougher than the Major League Baseball, or were they pretty similar, or?
I would say they were a little bit rougher. I mean, Major League Baseball was certainly a lot rougher than it is now. It's not even close.
Right.
A lot rougher than I think most of us imagine. Minor League Baseball was really rough. I would say Negro League Baseball might have been kind of like Minor League Baseball. But there are some indications it was a little bit rougher, and for good reason. Number one, again, the lack of. So making suspensions stick, even disciplining guys for, rushing umpires and things like that often didn't happen very much in the Negro Leagues. So that made it a little bit rougher. And another kind of indication is that, it was not uncommon apparently for umpires to pack pistols on the field in the Negro Leagues. So, and that gives you some indication of what people think about, the neighborhood, right? I mean, like, this is a tough place out here. Charleston, in fact, as I say in the book, tells a story on himself for getting his face one time, telling him to stop robbing his team. And he looks down. I can't remember exactly if it was in his stomach or he just sees the umpire in his pocket, with his hand in his pocket and with a pistol. And it's like, now, Mr. Charleston, you would not be a fool. And Charleston backs off. So, yeah, it was rough, primarily because of a lack of a strong league. And actually entirely because of the lack of a strong league. It was one reason why the Negro Leagues, especially early on, had trouble getting because it was a thankless task, and there was nobody going to have your back, from a league perspective. And so white umpires were sort of protected by their race, because to attack a white umpire was obviously to cross a lot of social lines, as Charleston did in 1915. And so it was often lamented in the black press, but often the black press, they would often say, but it's understandable because we're so rough on the umpires, and who would want this job? So one guy who did want it was Oscar Charleston, who became an umpire in 19.
Could you find any information about Charleston's thoughts about Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier versus himself or some other player?
Yeah, nobody had the thought apparently of going up and interviewing him right away in 1947. But later in that year, he is interviewed in, I forget what newspaper, to get his thoughts. I want to say it's the Wilmington, Delaware newspaper. And he says he's very happy about Robinson. He thinks he's going to think Satchel Paige is great for the Indians. He thinks and he doesn't mention Dobie by name, but he says all three of the ex-Negro Leaguers who are in the league right now, he thinks will be great. I'm paraphrasing, but he says how happy he is about that. And then later, when he's managing the Stars in the late 40s, Philadelphia Stars, he says how every player that he sends up to the American League or National League makes up in some way for him. So yeah, he was very happy about obviously the end of segregation. Baseball. Expected Negro League Stars to do very well, and he was very active in promoting the talent he had on the Philadelphia Stars, which was never great. Harry Suitcase Simpson was his best player on the Stars, but he was always trying to get them tryouts with major league teams and talking them up in the press and that kind of thing.
He didn't. Charleston didn't seem like he was that good of a manager. Or at least he didn't seem to get results as a manager. Was he given multiple opportunities because of the name and just getting people will come watch him manage and get his one at bat, when there was a runner in scoring position, or what?
That definitely would have played a part in it. I mean, he was considered an attraction. He was the biggest gate attraction in black baseball until he passes the baton to Satchel Paige in 1934, basically. I don't know that I would agree necessarily that he wasn't a good manager. He did win 4 championships as a manager in the Negro Leagues. He did pretty well with Harris. Mid-20s, which wouldn't have been expected necessarily. He was voted the best manager in the Negro Leagues by a poll of ex-Negro Leagues players taken in the 80s or 90s, I want to say. So there's some evidence that he was a pretty decent manager. I mean, I think I wouldn't argue with you if you want to say he wasn't the best manager in Negro Leagues history. But I think he was okay, and he was also a gate attraction, and he just had the kind of personality that at the time you wanted in a manager. He was just a no-nonsense, ex-military, with these guys into shape, John McGraw kind of manager. And people liked that. It was, during the war years, this is what we need, this kind of disciplinarian type. And that was Charleston. He was Vince Lombardi. If you were on time for the bus, you were 5-10 minutes too late. He really, a lot of his ex-players, when you talk to them, like Julian did and others, seem to appreciate that about him, because there was a bit of an inferiority complex among Negro Leagues players in terms of how good coaching and instruction they was versus their white counterparts. And so they were very appreciative of being taught like the X's and O's sorts of the game, like how to slide, how to take an extra base or round a base, the kind of the details of the game. Like one of Charleston's pitchers on the Stars, I believe, might have been the Clowns, said in an interview later in life that an umpire taught him the strike zone. Like he had never been taught the strike zone. It was an umpire who told him exactly where it was. So there was a lot of, what I want to say, like sensitivity about, like, man, we haven't been taught as well as we should. And so I think a lot of players appreciated that Oscar really knew the game. He was part of the black baseball tradition. Like he had learned it from C.I. Taylor and from Rube Foster. And those were probably the 2 great managerial figures, I would say, in the early 1900s. And there's a real tradition about how you play the game. One more point about that. I mean, we all remember the catch that Willie Mays made in 1954, the over-the-head basket catch. Allegedly, Gene Benson said that Charleston taught him that catch when he was coaching him, and that it was like a tradition in the Negro Leagues to learn that catch, with the back pedal, turn around and sprint and catch a ball over your head. I like to believe that was true.
So I can thank Oscar Charleston for costing the Indians a 54 World Series. Is that what you're saying?
Maybe indirectly. Sure. Let's just go ahead and say that.
What about, I mean, as I was reading through, you had many mentions of when Oscar would join up with other traveling teams and play against the white major leagues and all that. And it didn't seem as though his statistics in those games were as good as I would have expected the 4th best baseball player in history to be. So it made me wonder about, was he really as good as everybody said he was? Or is it because they liked him so much that they kind of enhanced his folklore when they told stories? So what's your opinion on that?
Hey, good question, a legitimate question. That's a question that I have when I went into this. Is like, is it possible that he was really that good? So first to the point on statistics, we have pretty good Negro League statistics now. If you go to seamheads.com and their Negro Leagues database, we have better statistics than we've ever had, including when the Negro Leagues were being played, because of the volunteer research of SABR members and others. Larry Lester estimates, I think we have like 70% maybe of game between major Negro Leagues. So they're pretty reliable, I think. And we also have, as part of that database, statistics against major league competition. So when Charleston played against those Detroit Tigers barnstorming teams, or the Cardinals, or the Browns, we have those numbers. And what we have for Charleston is 158 plate appearances. It's not that many, but he hit 355 with a 420 on base and a 738 slugging percentage in those games. So in fact, his OPS is higher in those games than it is against Negro Leagues competition. So he did plenty of league competition. Then we just have the testimonies of guys who played against him. Jess Haynes, who was a pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals, Excuse me, he clobbered Jess Haynes. He wasn't one of them. Who was it who said, shoot, I've got it in here. One of the Cardinals pitchers said he was the best he'd ever seen.
Was it one of the deans?
Nah, Dizzy Dean also had good things to say about him. He didn't say he was the best. Oh, it was Hollis Thurston. Hollis Sloppy Thurston. What a great nickname. Said, I've seen Fox, all of them. Benny Borgman, who was a scout, a white scout for the Cardinals, later went into the Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield as an administrator of some kind. Said the greatest ball player I've ever seen was Oscar Charleston. When I say this, I'm not overlooking Ruth, Cobb, Gehrig, and all of them. Honus Wagner said, I've seen all the great players in the many years I've been around. I've never seen anyone greater than Charleston. So even like the testimony of white counterparts who saw, keep in mind, the white players at the time, they knew how good the black players were because they played exhibition contest. And a lot of them weren't all that shy about telling the press what they thought about them, and usually it was very positive, reports. And they were kind of realists. Even Dizzy Dean, who as an Arkansas hillbilly didn't have the most enlightened, racial sensibilities, went out of his way to praise the black players that he played against. So I don't think, I think the statistics suggest he was as good as against major league players as they said. The testimonial, and then just consider stats against Negro Leagues competition, top tier Negro Leagues competition. He has about 6,000 plate appearances that we have a record of. That's about half of what Willie Mays had in the major leagues. All right. He hit 350, the 429 on base, and a 575 slugging percentage. The 173 OPS plus, if you like advanced statistics, 73% better than average. It's the fifth highest career OPS plus in the Seamheads database. He's third all time in batting average, fifth in slugging. And in the counting statistics, he's first all time in runs, hits, doubles, triples, RBIs, stolen bases, and walks. He's a mere third in home runs. His wins above replacement, as Seamheads calculates it, first all time by a long shot. So I was just like thinking about, okay, calculate your alternative Oscar in a major league environment. If in half the plate appearances that Willie Mays had, he had 191 home runs and 300 stolen bases and hit 350. Could he have hit 300 in the major leagues? 300 homers and 300 stolen bases. Yeah, I think that's highly likely. We like Doby and Irvin and those guys who came over in the prime of their career did not lose 40 points in the batting average when they came over. They did lose some, 10, 20 points. There's never been a 300 guy in Major League history. Not one. So I think Oscar would have been the only 300 guy we've seen. I think he would have considerably more than 300 stolen bases and probably hit considerably better than 300. So, yeah, I take it all kind of into account, Drew. And I think the statistics and the testimony. Yeah. We have 54th. Is he 7th? Is he 10th? Who knows? But I do think he's a inner circle guy, right there with Mays and those kinds of players.
Got it. Who else has a question? I want to thank all of you for sending me those questions. I didn't come up with them, so
yeah, they were great.
Thank you. Anyone else on the call want to ask Jeremy a question?
Am I on okay, Drew?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to send any in advance, but I just wanted to also comment on the sentimental side of the book that my husband has a lot of family in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And when you gave the specific addresses of certain people's houses, and you gave the name of the church that Oscar's second wife father was the minister of, I called my cousins and said, do you know the Wesley Union AME Church and Reverend Blaylock around 1915? They're like, yeah. His picture's up here, come see it. So everybody had like a little connection, like, oh, I can't believe it. Dad's on the deacon board or something. And that was fun. And then the Norfolk, Virginia picture that Drew or you were talking about, Jeremy, I wonder what paper it was in, because I'd love to see a picture of Oscar in Norfolk. And Drew and I are both in Norfolk, so we want all Norfolk baseball stuff. So,
if Drew would give you my email address, anybody, I have some clippings, I'm pretty sure, from a Norfolk paper that I'd be happy to send to you if you're interested.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah, I don't remember offhand, Paulette. If that, you are Paulette. That's on your which paper? I'm pretty sure I remember. There's a it might be Newport News.
Okay, because we have Virginian Pilot in Norfolk and Daily Press, Newport News. And then for Drew and anybody else who's a Hampton Roads person, the historically Black paper is the Journal and Guide. And
Right.
we can probably go in the archives and find something about him there.
That's the one. Yeah, there are a lot of
Journal
things
and Guide,
about him in the Journal and Guide. Yep. In fact, that's one of the, I would say it's one of the at least top like six or seven black papers the research I counted on.
Anyone else have any other questions? Jeff?
Hi again. I just finished reading a book on Cumberland Posey of the Homestead Grays, and I noticed that Oscar Charleston also played for him for a couple of years on and off. Can you talk about that?
Did that book just come out, Jeff?
Well, not too long ago. Not too long ago.
I gotta get that. I think I've seen it, but yeah, Cumberland Posey is a really interesting figure. Parents were sort of part of the Black elite in Pittsburgh. I think his father. What did his father own? Do you remember, Jeff? What did his father do for a living?
I think it was in the boating business, steam boats.
Shipping or something.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah, he done really, really well. Willis
Right.
Cumberland Posey Sr., I want to say is his full name. So yeah, I mean, Cumberland Posey Jr. was a great, he was a basketball star, right?
Right.
And but then got into baseball, and he guess he's kind of the co-owner anyway of the Homestead Grays. He recruited Charleston in the late 20s, 29, I think, to come out there. This is after Charleston had slugged him on the field in 1928, the game against Hillsdale. This is, by the way, one of the indications I think I have in Charleston's sort of like charm is like he could hit you in the face and you still kind of wanted him to come play for you. Like you weren't that put off by the guy. I don't know what he had going on, but most of the people who slug you in the jaw, you probably don't want to. Cumberland Posey didn't hold it. Come on out, sign him to a contract. I think Charleston, you have to do a lot of tea leaf. We have an autobiography, of course, from Charleston, but I think he liked Cumberland Posey. I think he liked the social status that Cumberland Posey had. He was very attracted to people he was socially ambitious. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but he really was interested in sort of climbing the scale. His second wife, as Paulette just said, came from a very good Harrisburg family, well-educated. And I think he was attracted to that. So I think Posey, one reason I think why he wanted to play for home was higher on the social. Yeah.
And Cumberland Posey is in the basketball and baseball Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He dressed like a golfer. You know, he always had the knickers on and the golf cap and everything. I mean, Charleston, I don't know if he ever dressed that way in his off time, but I think he would have appreciated Posey's, intelligence and, as I said, it's like social status. That's all I can say about it. He played for a couple of years. They seemed to get along just fine. But put a big pile of cash in front of him. And Charleston went for it.
I also have one more. I have a copy of the book here, and I'm rereading part of it. Where can you talk about how he was instrumental in giving William Bell his nickname?
Yeah, sure. He is Bell is a rookie, right, for the St. Louis Stars, and you're gonna Jeff, you probably remember this better than me if you just reread it. I haven't reread the book for a while. This is 1923-ish.
Around there.
Yeah, 23. And yeah, they're playing Indianapolis, and I think they're getting their brains beat in, and the manager puts Bell on the mound to give him a shot and see how he can do. And he fans somebody first, I think, and then he fans Charleston, who flings the bat away in disgust. And somebody says, man, he's a cool character or something like that. And somebody just adds, it seems like it's very random. Like, yeah, he's a cool papa, and there you have it. Cool papa.
Legend born.
Got his nickname from striking out Charleston, at least in part. That's the story anyway.
Right.
Many cool Papa Bell stories are borderline apocryphal, so you have to kind of be careful about them. Like Satchel Paige stories. Michael, you had a question?
No, it was about Cumberland Posey. And between you and Jeff, you answered every question I had. And I wanted to make sure that I knew he had a relationship with him over time. And I thought I remember one point where he slugged him in a fight. And then I saw them back together again. And I was like, okay, I just want to make sure it was all the same. So thank you.
It's amazing. It says a couple of things. First of all, like the social significance of slugging somebody in 1928 just was not what it is today. You know, people got in fights in the 20s and 30s and 40s, right? You got in fights in bars, you got in fights in the playgrounds, maybe you got in a fight in the family. Like it was a more fisticuffs oriented society than it is today. So yeah, sometimes you're reading it now, you're like, oh man, that's incredible. And then really, well, maybe it just wasn't that big a deal.
It struck me that a number of times the umpire would get slugged and the guy wouldn't get kicked out of the game or whatever. Yeah. That he would still be playing in the game. So I guess it was more tolerated then.
Yes, and again, especially the wrong league to do anything about it. So the umpire often had to kind of make a choice: do I want to continue in this game? Do I want to get paid for this game? Do I want to risk another fight? You know, it was hard.
So Jeremy, talk to me about Satchel Paige. I know you wrote a book on Oscar Charleston, but as I didn't have, and I've read a couple Indians, historical things that talk about Paige, and I always knew he was a showman, and I always knew he had a lot of personality. But from what I read in the Charleston book, he seemed really flighty, like just an odd dude. So it makes me want to go find more Satchel Paige books and read them because he just seems like a very interesting character. And I think I know why Bill Veeck signed him now is because of his personality, but I'll let you go.
Yeah, Veeck knew a personality when he saw one. Yeah, first of all, Larry Tye, Tye, his biography of Satchel Paige is well worth reading. It came out 8 or 9 years ago. It's a very readable book. Yeah, Paige was, he's great to read about, is a great showman, is an incredible pitcher. He really was probably the best pitcher in Negro Leagues history. But you may not, he was the kind of guy that if you were serious about like your team winning, showing up, he could drive you crazy. Especially if you were the manager of that team. So yeah, he was flighty. I mean, he was not just flighty, but he was, I think like I said in the book, like he was completely immune from the contagion of team spirit. Like, he was just not a guy who cared that much about all for the team. He just wasn't one of those men. He was, in it for the show. He obviously looked out for Satchel Paige, and he could be distracted by money, not just from season to season, but from game to game. He could be distracted by a fishing hole, if that's what he wanted to do that day. So yeah, he was a free spirit, and I think it drove it. He just didn't have any of that kind of team, military duty, obligation kind of thing going on at all. And so you can see Charleston in the press clippings getting increasingly frustrated with Paige as his career, on and off again career with the Crawfords, progresses to the point that they eventually trade Paige for schoolboy Johnny Taylor, I think in 37 and 38. Well, 30s, yeah, maybe it's after he jumps to the Dominican. Also a very Satchel. So yeah, all that. Yeah. He was a great guy if you had him on the field, but if you had to count on him to get to the next game, it was tough. So when he would travel with the Stars in the early 50s, I want to say late 40s, early 50s, Charleston would drive Paige to the games. Like, he wouldn't leave it to chance that Paige would show up. He would drive Paige to the games. And that was often what people did later in his career, was just like, don't let him behind the wheel of his own vehicle, or you don't know where it will go.
Yeah, in the Effa Manley book, there's a number of different passages about Newark trying to sign Paige, and him, and then he not showing up, and then he'll write Effa some letters and say, I really want to play with you guys, and then he would never sign the contract. I mean, it's just like he seems like Dennis Rodman before, without tattoos and earrings everywhere.
He's a friend you have who's an awesome. You love this friend. He's so great. But he also bags on half the things you plan, and doesn't come up with his share of the room, and never springs for the check at dinner, that kind of thing. That's Satchel Paige.
Jeremy, I wanted to ask you about, of course, Oscar Charleston's playing career in Cuba. I found it fascinating that he played really 12 months a year.
Yeah, he did. It's pretty amazing. He played in Cuba pretty much every offseason in the 1920s, as well as once in the teens. I think there were 10 or 11 winters that he played in Cuba. He became a legend down there, if we can believe what later writers have written who grew up in Cuba. One of them is a Yale literature professor, last name Gonzalez Echeverria, if I remember that correctly. And he was on a couple of the most dominating teams of all time in Cuba, the Santa Clara Leopardos of 1922-23 and 23-24, the latter season in particular. Dominating center fielder down there. He, as I said, he learned Spanish. He didn't just learn to understand it, but to speak it and to write it well enough that when he got in a famous fight, Oscar Charleston, in 1924, I think I'm remembering this correctly, he went into third base with his spikes high, which is how Charleston came into the base. And the Cuban third baseman was upset about that and took a swing at Charleston. Charleston swung back. Next thing you know, this guy's brother, who was a soldier in the Cuban army, had jumped out of the stands and was also trying to get at Charleston. This gets exaggerated. Charleston is fighting on the field or whatever. There's no evidence that that's the case. It's possible that some others also came out to try to restore order, but in the end, the third baseman, Cueto, I think was his last name. I may be remembering that incorrectly. Got taken to the hospital, and Charleston, you can see the newspaper pictures. He just like walking calmly off the field, with the police as they take him off to the station where they booked him for the evening. So he got the better of the fight. We know that, however many soldiers may have been involved. But here's the point. He's getting pilloried in the press. There's rumors that he hates Cubans. He's always hated them. He's looking for some way to get back at them. And then he has friends spring to his defense. Turns out he has lots of high-placed friends in Cuba who are writing letters to the editor themselves. Like, this is a complete lie. He's a gentleman. He's a highly cultured man. And then you get a letter from Oscar himself written in Spanish. And I think he wrote it himself, explaining, like, I certainly have nothing against Cuba or nothing against the military. I respect the uniform. And he gets a private meeting with the Cuban military, the result of which is that he's completely exonerated, and the military promises that they're going to punish the soldier who came out into the field and took a swing. So again, these are the evidences we have that he was a charming man, and he could get it out of situations, and an intelligent man. He knew Spanish well enough, just in a few short winters. Maybe he was studying it back home too. I have no idea. It's very possible he was.
He seemed to have a lot of street smarts.
Yeah. Yes. And a lot of street charisma too, Yeah, he knew how to deal with things, knew how to deal with people, knew how to make friends. So there's lots of just great quotes about him, how good he was at making people like him.
Right. Anyone else have any other questions for Jeremy? So it seemed like we talked about Cuba. He had, there were 4 teams in the Cuban League at that one point, but
Yeah.
it seemed like all these guys played year round. How did they physically keep up with doing what they did? Travel back then was an absolute, it was tough. And these guys are going to Cuba and back and training in Miami and how did they physically keep up with this?
Can you imagine talking to one of these guys about load management?
Yeah.
It's an insult. The toughness was incredible. It was even tougher for white players then too, but for the Negro Leagues players, like you say, the travel's terrible. The food is often not great. There's certainly no nutritionist on staff. There's no rehab. There's no crew of people to attend to your physical needs. If you got hurt, you might be off the team. So you had to play through injuries, unless you're a real star. Even then, you couldn't be off for that long. The sleep, they didn't get much sleep oftentimes. Of traveling on the road, trying to sleep on a bus. Bob Motley, great autobiography, by the way, that I'd recommend to you. Really, really readable. One of the greatest books I've read on the Negro Leagues. And he goes on at length about how stinky those buses were. I mean, they were just incredibly stinky. Anyway, plus there's one more thing. Yeah, Drew, I mean, and then they played year round. So yeah, you finish Oscar often, you finish the Negro League season, then you play like exhibition contests against major league teams for a few weekends. Then boom, off to Cuba, usually in November, and you're playing there until February. Come back, give you 4 weeks to rest, off spring training, usually a southern barnstorming tour, playing 2 games a day through these little pissant towns throughout the South, I mean, it was really, and there's year after year after year. So how they do it, I don't know, but it's proof that you can do it, I guess. It's just
mind over matter.
It's just the toughness was incredible. But you can make money doing it. And that was the other thing. So Charleston, like we said, they got paid pretty well compared to the average worker in season, but that's only for 6 months out of the year. So making more money on exhibition contests. Sometimes people are just giving you money on the field for a great play, right? Hey, bank it now. You don't know what awaits for you after this career is over, right? So, yeah, I don't know how they did it, but when I hear load management and stuff like this, and it's just sad. That's all.
What was his marriage like? I mean, they obviously, well, they didn't get divorced, right? They just decided not to live together and went separate ways. But I mean,
yeah,
he seemed street smart. He seemed to be very savvy. So I wonder if he was that way with the ladies at the time too, and that drove a wedge between he and his wife.
That was a rumor. And by the way, we have Ted Knorr with us, and Ted actually is the Harrisburg baseball historian. And Ted knows all about Jeannie Blaylock and her family. Ted, do you know Paulette, who's on here? Her family is from Harrisburg.
Yeah, my husband has a significant number of family in Harrisburg. They were ones that moved to Steelton and Harrisburg in the, say, 1940s, Great Migration. And so every Thanksgiving and all like that, I'm always up in Harrisburg visiting the cousins. And when I read what Jeremy wrote with specific addresses and the name of the Wesley Church, I called the cousins. They knew the church. They knew Blaylock's name. They knew everything about him. So I was just thrilled with all the personal research and coincidences.
Ted, you're muted.
Ted, you're on mute.
Yeah, Paulette in particular. Morant is a popular name in Lancaster. That's just down the road. Any relations in Lancaster?
No, I think that the thing that has helped the Morant name lately is the young man named Ja Morant, who's in basketball, Rookie of the Year. He is our cousin from South Carolina. Ja's great-grandfather and my father-in-law, both deceased, were brothers. But I did not know that there were Morants in Lancaster, so I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, and I'm talking Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Right. That's it. And I know how to say Lancaster because I used to teach at Lincoln University, so they taught us that while we were there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, Ted knows all about the Blaylock family. In fact, I learned a lot. I got a lot from Ted for this book. You ask about his marriage to Janie. Yeah, he was. I had the fortune, thanks to Ted, who connected me with Caleb Jackson Jr., a Harrisburg historian, to meet Janie's niece, or great niece. She gave me a lot of Janie and the family. In fact, a picture that nobody had ever seen before. It seemed like it was a happy marriage, at least for a while. They were well matched in certain ways. They're ambitious and smart, cultured sorts of people. But the rumor is that Charleston did have a little trouble, maybe more than rumor, swatting away some of the women who might be available to a ball player at that time. There were a couple of newspaper pieces that sort of slyly allude to some affair on his part, which had to be painful to Janie. So we don't know exactly when they separated. They never got divorced. Her family, her father, she would never have committed a divorce, is what I was told. Her father was a UME minister, or AME minister. So, but that's just how they ended it. She didn't like come to his Hall of Fame ceremony or anything like that. Once when her great niece asked her if she still had anything of Charles, he was going into the Hall of Fame in 1970. She said, "I sure hope not." And she wasn't sure, her great niece, Janie's great niece, whether she meant, "I hope I gave it all to his family, Anna Charleston Bradley," or whether, "I hope I don't have any of that guys around anymore." But she did hang on to a statuette that Charleston had given her in 1928. He's wearing a Hilldale uniform. It's like a carved wooden piece of his silhouette with a picture of him on the front. So it's like him batting, I guess, from the left side. And she thought, the niece thought that Janie had hung on to that intentionally.
And Jeremy, one point on that, when you turned it over, what did you find?
Well, just to Janie from Oscar, or Love Oscar, or something like that,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a hard one to, she didn't like baseball. And some of the players said she didn't mix well with the other players and wives. I suspect maybe she was just a little bit, she was highly educated and she was very proper and formal. And she wasn't a baseball person. How they ever got together is kind of a mystery. Her brother, I guess, right? Was a promoter in Harrisburg, right? Bud?
Her brother or cousin, I'm not sure. Bud Marshall, though, yes.
Yeah. So, I don't know. It's an interesting story. His first wife was also from a really good family in Indianapolis, but that didn't last either. So I suspect he was probably a difficult man to be married to in certain ways.
Well, especially when you're barnstorming and then you're going to Cuba, that had to be hard. And he didn't have any children, right, with either spouse.
No, which that made it harder to read the book, right? I mean, that's one reason why he's been forgotten is not having the fortune of having children.
And his gravestone was just replaced to a more significant one.
Yes, thanks to the Negro Leagues Museum. I had the pleasure of writing the new epitaph for it. There is a new headstone on his grave, which formerly just had the simple military issue veterans stone, very small. So now there's one that talks about it.
And he's buried where again?
Indianapolis.
Indianapolis.
Floral Park Cemetery in Indianapolis.
Yeah. All right. Does anyone else have any questions? We're going on an hour, and I don't want to impose on Jeremy unless we have more good questions for him.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us. It was very educational. Appreciate your time. Everyone else, thanks for contributing questions that that we asked, and we'll have to decide on what our next book will be. So, everyone, have a good evening, and I hope your baseball team wins in the next 2 weeks so they can make the playoffs.
All right. Thank you all.
Good night, everybody.
Goodbye.